كبيرا.
سبحان الله.
وأن الذين لا يؤمنون بالآخرة أعتدنا لهم عذابا أليما.
ما شاء الله. سبحان الله.
ويدعو الإنسان بالشر دعاءه بالخير
وكان الإنسان عجولا.
وكان الإنسان عجولا. وجعلنا الليل والنهار آيتين فمحونا آية الليل وجعلنا آية النهار مبصرة لتبتغوا فضلا من ربكم ولتعلموا عدد السنين والحساب. وكل شيء فصلناه تفصيلا. وكل إنسان ألزمناه طائره في عنقه.
سبحان الله.
ونخرج له يوم القيامة كتابا يلقاه منشورا اقرأ كتابك اقرأ كتابك كفى بنفسك اليوم عليك حسيبا. من اهتدى فإنما يهتدي لنفسه ومن ضل فإنما يضل عليها ولا تزر وازرة وزر أخرى وما كنا معذبين حتى نبعث رسولا.
سبحان الله. سبحان الله.
من اهتدى فإنما يهتدي لنفسه ومن ضل فإنما يضل. من اهتدى فإنما يهتدي لنفسه وازرة وزر أخرى وما كنا معذبين حتى نبعث رسولا
Subhanallah.
صدق الله العظيم.
MashaAllah. Subhanallah. Subhanallah.
اللهم ارحمنا بالقرآن العظيم واجعله لنا إيمانا ونورا وهدى ورحمة وشفاء يا رب العالمين. السلام.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So now we would like to open the workshop.
MashaAllah. MashaAllah. Mabruk. Mabruk.
Thank you very much, Imam Hassan Khan, for your beautiful recitation. Now we are ready for the workshop. We all ready for the workshop. My name is Emi Goto from this institute, Research Institute for Language and Culture of Asia and Africa. We call it ILCAA, ILCA for short. At the Tokyo University of Foreign Studies, also we call it TUFS, TUFS. And let me start thanking all of you for joining our international workshop, Leaders of the Qur'an. Leaders of the Qur'an, Beyond the Boundaries. This event is hosted by our institute, ILCA. We are honored to have you all and spend a great half day together with you. The initial idea for this workshop came from a communication with Professor Shaka Torawa, who has recently published a beautiful book. Sorry, I forgot to bring yes, this one, the devotional Qur'an. I will put it on the table back so you can read it later. In his introduction, Professor Torawa tells us about his early experiences with the Quran. It was not an ordinary one that I thought. His first encounter with the Quran in Arabic was as a very young child in Paris. From his parents, it was from his parents. He then received early instruction from a Senegalese tutor. In the following years, while living in Singapore, he had a Tamil scholar who taught him to recite the Quran. The encounter with English translations was also influential for him, and more experience followed. That is inside the introduction too. And from his account, I realized that reading the Quran is an evolving and growing experience for one to have beyond geographical or physical boundaries. Although there are excellent books on the leaders of the Quran, this dynamic dimension hasn't been taken up so much. Therefore, in this workshop, we will try to capture how the Quran is read today, focusing on people who move between different boundaries. Initially, the act of reading the Quran was something that was done only by a limited group of scholars. However, with the beginning of the 20th century, the spread of education and the wider availability of publication and translated works made it possible for more and more people to read the Quran. Barriers created by political, gender, and religious situations have changed, though they have not yet disappeared. The speakers at this event are all experts who have a strong interest in the Quran and how it is read. Some of them are the translators of the Quran. Today, based on their presentations, we will consider recent variations and development in reading the Quran, the readers and way of reading the Quran, as well as its future tragedy. So now let us move on to part 1, global experiences. Here we have 4 presentations. The first speaker is Professor Shaukat Torawa that I introduced earlier, and his short bio is in your handout, so you can read it. In addition to the devotional Quran mentioned earlier, there is a forthcoming edited collection on the literary dimension of the Quran. And Professor Torawa is on the editorial board of the prestigious journals, a Journal of Quranic Studies, and editor of Studies in the Quran, and executive editor of the Library of Arabic Literature. That is an initiative to edit and translate important texts from the pre-modern Arabic literary heritage. So now we invite Professor Shaukat Torawa. So I open the PowerPoint.
Good afternoon. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much. There really aren't words to express how much gratitude I feel to the organizers for inviting me all the way to Japan from the United States, which is a long way away. It's a real honor to be in this audience and to share with you some of my experiences. I thought I would speak about doing the Quran justice in translation, talk a little bit about some of the challenges that face translators into English, translations into English, and some of the challenges I'm going to identify are ones that I think are not taken up actually. I should make 2 apologies. The first is that, as I always do, I leave everything for the last minute. And this morning I changed my PowerPoint sequence of slides, but then I neglected to send it to the organizers, so it's going to be out of order. But I've been doing this for long enough that I should probably be able to work it out. The second apology is that it's going to seem like I'm promoting my own translation, and that's not at all my intention. I use my own translations as a way of showing another way to do things. It is not the only way, and it is certainly not the best way. It's just a way to provide a counterpoint to what I've encountered. So let's start, and you'll see me when I panic, when the slide doesn't match what I say. So new full translations of the Quran into English seem to appear every year. For me, these, and indeed preceding translations, continue to fall short in 2 very important ways. One, they ignore the acoustic qualities of the original: cadence, rhythm, assonance, sound clusters, and rhyme. The second way translations fall short is that they are unimaginative on the page. That is, they do not explore fully all the possibilities afforded by English form, English type, and English typography, and indeed even English style. Some English translators, for example, Reynold Nicholson, about 100 years ago, Michael Sells, about 40 years ago, 30 years ago, and Rafi Habib and Bruce Lawrence, whose translation just appeared last February, and myself, have tried to take up the challenge. And I'd like to emphasize, we've only tried. Of the first issue, rhyme, rhythm, sound. Typically, though not exclusively, with the shorter surahs, which because of their lexicon and their syntax are much more pliable and easier to turn into a rhyming assonant English. But two, that is what I've listed here as one, because I'll be talking mainly about English form and style and typography, but that has rarely been broached. For me, as a scholar, as someone who tries to translate, but most importantly, as a reader of the Qur'an, in English as well as in Arabic, these are of fundamental importance. Now, some translators have tried to mirror typographical features of the Arabic. Arthur Jeffrey, for example, sought to reflect the artistic quality of many masahif. So you can see I've put one page of the Qur'an on the left and tried to show on the right how he's tried to do something with the shape of the page, with the layout, to try and evoke the actual appearance of any number of Qur'ans. For those of you, I think most of you have probably seen a Qur'an in this room, but I often speak to audiences who've never actually opened a Qur'an. I like to show this image, right, to show how important it is, even to the people who are producing masahif, producing Qur'an, how important it was that the appearance be beautiful and evocative. Now, I have, in my translations, used boldface. See, I've got my slides out of order. I'll come back to that one. Boldface. If you look at the second line from the bottom, the H is capitalized, of humanity. That represents the beginning of a new ruku'. And that's how I marked it. If you look at the top, they fall down in prostration. Many of you will know that the prostration verses in the Quran are overlined. And so I thought it would be useful, or at least informative, for English readers to see where that takes place. And in English we underline, we don't overline. So underlining. You can see that if I read it, when the signs of the Lord of mercy are recited to them, they fall down in prostration, weeping earnestly. But they were succeeded by successors who neglected prayer and followed their desires. They shall meet their own iniquity. Not those who repent, believe, and act righteously. They will be wronged in no way and will enter the garden with facility. Gardens of Eden, though unseen, yet promised to his servants by the Lord of mercy. His promise is certainty. And I italicized the final word so that the reader would notice immediately that there was something to do with that word. And quite rapidly, one realizes it's a rhyme word. And so there's a kind of visual correspondence to the potential acoustic one. And so if we go down, nightly, true piety, forgetfully, similarly, assuredly. Several centuries ago, the King James Bible translators used many features of English typography, including italics, in those places where they felt they were paraphrasing. So this is an early 1617 page of the 1611 translation, and you can see there is an attempt to make it quite beautiful. You see the capital A, you see some things are in bold, some things are not, right? So this is not something that we're unfamiliar with in the English language, or unfamiliar with when we're translating scripture, right? It's something available to us. Quli Qara'i uses italics on the word you to distinguish the second person singular. I'm not sure it shows very well in here, but the arrows, you are liable to imperil your life. The second arrow is obviously in the wrong place. So we go back to the first one, that you is italicized. And so he uses you usually to distinguish the second person singular, typically the prophet, and the second person plural. right? So it's not clear in English when you say you, or when the Quran says you, whether the Prophet is being addressed, whether people are being addressed. And so he uses italics, so it's something he's aware of. Some translators use superscripts. On the left, you see US, UPL, and just U capitalized. And the idea is that U singular, U plural, and U God, which is usually capitalized, can be distinguished. I don't need to tell you that it's quite distracting to see the little S and the little PL when you're reading a translation, because you end up reading use and upul instead of reading you. In the case of the translators of the study Quran, they decided to use an archaic form of the second person to avoid this problem, but then they rendered their translation archaic. And even though it only came out about 10 years ago, they translate, "Thy Lord has not forsaken thee." The only people who speak like this in the contemporary world are the Quakers in their meeting houses. No one else speaks like this. This will immediately evoke laughter in the hearers. So they're doing a disservice, in my view, to the Quran, because people will pick up this Quran and quote it to people, and then on the one hand, people will realize that it's supposed to sound sort of scriptural. One of the things I say in my introduction to my book is that when I first encountered Yusuf Ali's translation, I liked the fact that it sounded very, to my mind, very Victorian, very archaic. But there's a huge cost of using words like this. My point being that translators are not unaware of options. Color has been used. You can see these little ayah markers are red. Color has been used, this is the wrong slide, by translators. You probably have, many of you have probably seen masahif published in color, where the color is used to point out things like hunna or qalqala or idgham for the learner or the reader, so that they know what's going on. So we have Qur'ans that are written, published in Arabic that use color. Very few Qur'ans in English use color. In this case, this is Zaki Hamad. It's a very good translation. He uses it for, I suppose, what I would call the non-Quranic material. The number, the name in English, the ayah numbers down the side, but not in his translation in any way. This next slide will come as a little bit of a shock, so I hope you're all sitting down. This is Sando Burke's The American Qur'an. This is an artist who decided, based on his travels around the world, that he thought Americans were not sufficiently well understanding Islam and the Qur'an, and he thought that if he could do something that would bridge the distance between the average ignorant American reader and the Qur'an, it might help them understand it better. He's a very famous and accomplished artist. And so he decided to start illustrating the surahs with scenes from modern American life to make the text meaningful. And he used out of copyright translations. So he just went and found translations that he could reproduce. So everything here is done by hand. This panel is about this big, and there's 400 of them. And they were collected into a volume published by Norton, and that's the cover of it there. So this is Al-Adiyat, and so if you know the surah, Wal-Adiyati Dabhan, the idea is that they're charging, things that are charging, and that are cleaving a host or a group. And so he decided that he would use NASCAR cars. These are very famous races that take place in the United States. And so he's visually trying to interpret or translate the Quran into a medium that, to his understanding, right, the readers will be more able to contact with. I show this mainly as an example of color, but also to introduce you, if you don't know this book. It's a spectacular piece of work. It took him 9 years of working every day. Produced. This is Surah Kaf. He's interpreted the 7 sleepers as miners that are stuck in a cave. Right? This happens in modern life. This is Surah Maryam, and he's got a church, a Latin American church in the background, probably in LA or somewhere like that. So, color. Oh, and also, if one knows the surah, the palm trees represent the palm that she will lean against. I mean, there's all kinds of visual images that are cues to the surah. So in what follows, I will briefly show how I believe a handful of strategies can be attempted, possibly even achieved. In the abstract, I described the following. Nesting, I think I did anyway. Nesting, which is placing within text. Alternating, which is text in different typefaces, which I've already mentioned. Reiterating, which is repeating texts. Storyboarding, which is imagining scenes and assigning dialogue. In one respect, that's what Sandelberg does, because for a large chunk of text, he has only one image. And sermonizing, or relying on the sermon genre. But I don't know if I have time to get to sermonizing. Narrative, clustered and long surahs can benefit from the typographical interventions afforded by English. This is my view. Let us look at Surah Kaf. Right? This is Surah Kaf. You can see that was another slide that's in the wrong place. The yellow highlights, if you can see them, it's a vertical line in the first case, it's a caesura or a long dash in the second, an exclamation point in the third, right? And the exclamation point is not an unfamiliar item, although I was very interested to see a review appeared very recently of two Quran translations, including mine. And one of the things that the reviewer says is, Turawa is very fond of exclamation points. And I think what he's pointing out is that it's not used very often in the Quran, but it seemed to me important to say. So in this line here, it's, let me read from the beginning. Praise God, who revealed to his servants a book free of improbity, a righteous book that warns of severe punishment and that assures believers who do good of a great reward, wherein to reside for eternity, that warns those who say that God is progeny, right? That's the unbelievable thing, exclamation. What do they or their forefathers know? Not as a question, which would be read very differently in English. What do they and their forefathers know is a simple question eliciting, this is outrage. What do they and their forefathers know? The exclamation point allows one to do that. The blue highlights, I don't need to look at this because I should know what the blue highlights are, show an alternation of text type. So you've got regular, and then the Lord provide us with guidance. It's very common in translations to put all the speech in the Quran in inverted commas, in quotes. This is quite common. And there's a lot of embedded speech. And then that is put in further in quotes. And what ends up happening is the page is cluttered with quotation marks. And it's not clear who's speaking or when someone is speaking or not speaking. That is to say, other than the God speaker of the Quran. And so, in this version, in this iteration, I thought that italics would immediately mark to the reader that someone is saying something. Right? So, some youths repaired to a cave calling out is the narrator, which is God here. And then, Lord, provide us with guidance in this predicament, bestow on us your mercy, is them speaking, and then it changes back to God. For many years we made him sleep, right? For example. So that's one way in which something as simple as italics can do work for the Quranic reader, the reader of the Quran. The other thing that the blue points out is what I call indentation or nesting, right? This is something else that translators don't do. Surah Kaf is a succession of stories. There's a story about the sleepers. There's a story about the gardeners. There's a story about Alexander. And in many translations, it's just a continuous text. Now, there is distinguished precedent for having continuous text, which is the Quran in Arabic. The Quran in Arabic is always continuous text. But the Quran in Arabic is in Arabic, and it's also the Quran. And this is not the Quran in Arabic, and this is not the Quran. Right? This is an attempt to produce a version in English to make it accessible to the English reader. And so for me, when I was translating, there seemed no option but to indent whenever there was a new story. It also helps mark what I would call the meta account and the subsidiary account. So the meta account is, the biggest question is, are the sleepers of the cave and the tablet not signs of our wondrous artistry? Right? That's the big question. And then what's the answer? The answer is, some youths repaired. It's a story. The answer to that question is actually a story. So it's nested underneath that. I should also mention that when I talked about sermonizing, for example, when I repeat not signs, it's not repeated in the Arabic. But in English, in the sermonizing or oratorical mode, that is exactly what preachers do. They repeat phrases. And in fact, we heard that's fantastic mellifluous recitation. And what did the reciter do? Repeated important phrases. So the repetition is not, as some might feel, some kind of violation of the way that the Quran works. It is trying to take into account features of the Quran and of Quranic Arabic and translate them into English in ways that work in English, right? The baseline, we have distinguished translators here from whom we'll hear, but the baseline is that when you're translating into another language, you have to respect that language into which you're translating, the target language and the target reader, because they are the ones you're trying to reach. There is no point making it sound like Arabic in English. It needs to sound like English. At least that's how I'm guided. Let's see what's next. Oh, so this is the rest of the surah. And you can see that there's God speaking, and then there's the Moses story. So, and Moses, and then it's indented, and now we have the Moses story. He said to his attendant, I shall not stop till I reach the confluence, even if it prolongs my journey. That's Moses speaking in italics. They reached the concursion, and the lad left their fish, which wriggled and slipped into the sea. When they had passed it, he said to his attendant, that's the narrator, now there's a phrase, let's eat now, this has been a tiring odyssey. You know what, when we stopped at that rock, I forgot the fish there, and what's more, the devil made me forget to mention it. It wriggled into the sea quite wondrously. That is what we're seeking, Moses said. So they retraced their steps carefully, and so on. And although I have not done this, I have published this translation, I haven't done this, but I'm showing there are ways of incorporating artistic or illustrations that help explain the story. Anyone who looks at this and sees that fish there will connect it to this very important part of the story. Now, one doesn't have to include it, but I was just speaking earlier, Professor Mizutani, about the graphic translation, the manga translation of the Quran. There's a reason, there's a readership for whom doing this will make the Quran more accessible. And it is just to be in denial to think that one can't use these resources that are available. So in the case of Japanese, I assume, I don't know that much about Japanese visual culture, but what I do know is that it's quite suffused with manga and related animated material. It makes perfect sense that that is an outcome. In the case of English, there are typographical features, and there's also illustration, but although it's not as common as I would like. This is a contrast, to give you a contrast. This, at the very top, the first 5 lines, is from the Study Quran, and it reads, and when Moses said unto his servant, in line 3, there is no way for the reader to know that we are now in a new story. There is no marking of any kind. There's no highlight, there's no break, there's no paragraph, right? So the English reader is forced to work that out for themselves. The Arabic, the way the Arabic is constructed, it's easy to do. It's easy to note. It's not easy in English. That and in English isn't doing enough work. And when Moses is not doing enough work. The other feature of the Study Quran that, to me, I find distracting, and this is not to disparage it, is these 2 pages have 5 lines of Quran and 1,000,000 lines of commentary, which to me is forbidding and makes it hard for someone to access, even Muslims. This is really intended, I think, for Muslims. I find that to be a very forbidding way to present the text. Certainly not in keeping with the way that the Quran operates. This just shows it in greater detail. So this is how I think it might be done in a more useful way, and that is how they did it. This is Surah Luqman. Sorry to keep hitting on the Study Quran, but it's a venerable text. This is Surah Luqman. So you have a little bit of it on the left, a little bit on the right, the commentary below. And this is Alan Jones, which is a very respected translation. So I should mention the Study Quran, if you don't know it, is translated by Muslims. A team of Muslim translators, accompanied by a lot of commentary, which is from the tradition. So it's all, none of their own commentary, it's all from the tradition. And it's followed by a series of very useful essays about the Quran. This is Alan Jones, who's a professor at Oxford for many years, who wanted to show that the Quranic language was very close to the language of pre-Islamic poetry. He wanted to show that it came out of the same linguistic universe, which is true. And this is how he set his translation up. So I'm just showing you Surah Luqman, this is how they did it. And when I tried to translate it, I thought it might be helpful to do it this way. I actually don't like this anymore, but I'm just sharing with you the ways in which I, as someone who was translating it, wanted to play with the appearance on the page to try and help the reader. And so what you see here is every time there's a change of speaker, there's a paragraph or a new stanza. So there's a break, so the reader is forced to stop and start again. I also experimented with putting when God was speaking on the left, on the right, and when Luqman was speaking on the left, so that you could read all the Luqman advice on one side and read the remainder of the surah on the other if you so wished. It didn't work. As an English reader, I was troubled by it. I was also troubled by this. I think I published this like this. I don't remember. But this is Surah Al-Qur'an. So again, this is about spacing and about placement. So some translators, because it sounds like I'm saying that translators pay no attention to this, some translators are attentive to it, and Khalidi, whose translation I like, says in his introduction, more substantial is the issue of translating the many voices in which the Qur'an speaks to us. The reader will doubtless notice that the register of the Qur'an constantly shifts from narrative to exhortation, from homily to hymn of praise, from strict law to tender sermon, from fear and trembling to invitations to reflection. These, I decided, had to look different. Interestingly, he uses italics on had here, but he doesn't use italics in his text, in his translation. Had to look different. Hence the horizontal and vertical disposition of the translations. And he has some texts that are horizontal and some texts that are vertical. It's actually quite successful. I don't think I brought an example of it. Here. Now, I shouldn't reveal that until I say something about it. Now, another model that's available, not for the entire Quran, is storyboarding. Storyboarding is what filmmakers do when they're trying to imagine how they're going to film something. They draw them on storyboards to imagine the action. As you all know, the Quran has a lot of passages that are narratively, that are quite dramatic. And probably the best example of it is Surah 12. So on the left is Jane McAuliffe's updating of Muhammad Marmaduke Pickthall's translation. And this is from Surah Yusuf. And on the right is a translation that I did as a play script. If you imagine that it was acted out. And to be clear, it's not because I think it should be produced as a play. It's a way to get the English reader closer to what the Arabic is doing. And so if we look at the left, it says, we narrate to you, parentheses, Muhammad, the best of narratives, in that we have inspired in you this Quran. Though before you, you were of the heedless. When Joseph said to his father, "O my father, I saw in a dream 11 planets and the sun and the moon. I saw them prostrating themselves to me." He said, "O my dear son, do not tell your brothers of your vision, for fear that they plot a plot against you. Satan is for man an open foe." If you go down, you'll see it says, they said, one said, which has to be supplied, one among them said, they said. It's a constant series of identification of who's speaking. So I took those out and I just identified who they were on the left column in gray and then translated in the middle. So just so you know, what's in red is what I added. So I've added nothing to the Quran. I've simply noted scene 2 and said where it's taking place, right? Because it's dramatic. So this is another thing that's available. This appeared in the Journal of Quranic Studies a couple of years ago. And interestingly, and we have a witness here, we did it as a read-through at the International Quranic Studies Association, where I gave everyone a script and I gave everyone a part. And every time it was Joseph speaking, Nikolai Sinai spoke, and every time it was Zuleika, Mariana Clark spoke. When it was Jacob, Joseph Larry, these are all professors of Quranic studies in the world, Muslims and non-Muslims. And we did a read-through, and I think it's fair to say that because of attention to the form, we all learned a little bit more about the surah. We all learned a little bit more than reading it as a continuous narrative. And in the article that I published about this, one of the things I propose is that when the Quran says, the beginning of that surah, that this is Ahsan al-Qasas, the best of stories, maybe one of the ways in which it is the best of stories is that it is a dramatic narrative of a particular kind. Right? So this example is both an example of attention to genre within the Quran, right? There's different kinds of genres in the Quran, and an attention to typography. 2 minutes. I have it right here. Yes. So, another set of translators that are attentive to sound is Habib and Lawrence. This just came out. When the sun is folded up, when the stars fall down scattered, when the mountains move vanishing, when camels pregnant to term are left untended, when wild beasts are herded together, when the oceans boil over, when souls are paired, when the infant girl buried alive is asked for what crime she was killed, when the scrolls of deeds are opened wide, and so on, right? And so they have a long introduction about verse and how it was very important. And again, I'm using my own example as a counterpoint just to show you how I think rhyme and rhythm might work differently. When the sun is smothered and the stars untethered, the mountains upended, pregnant camels untended, when the wild beasts are herded and the seas distended, when the souls are girded and the buried girl child is asked for what crime she was murdered, when the pages are bared and the heavens paired, when the fire burns bright and the gardens in sight, then shall each soul learn if it's prepared. And I want to say, I'm not a poet, and I'm not even an especially good translator, right? All I'm trying to say is that I think if people pay more attention to these things, so much more would be gained from translation of the Quran. So let me close with the liabilities of this. On the left is my original translation of Surah Inshirah. Did we not your breast prize open? Did we not your back unburden? Of the weight on it and lighten, and did we not your good name strengthen? With all distress comes easiness. Yes, with all distress comes easiness. So when you are free, concentrate, and upon your Lord contemplate. It rhymes. You know, it looks a lot like the Arabic. Almost everyone who saw this when it was published said, this is great, we use it in our classes. And I went back to it, and I thought, except it sounds very wooden. It sounds very forced. The Quran, that surah does not sound forced. It's an intimate surah of God providing solace to the Prophet. And so this is what can come out. If one is more attentive to the English readership than the Arabophone or Arabic readership. Didn't I soothe your heart when you were down, remove the burden that weighed you down, lighten the load that kept you down, raise you up and bring you renown? This shall pass, this too shall pass. When your work is done, attend and turn to your Lord. So one has to be careful of being too wedded also to rhythm and rhyme and translation. I have one more, but our time is up. This is a not very good representation of me and you asking me questions. And the important thing to remember is that this is from the Maqamat of Al-Hariri, so actually the guy on the stage is an imposter. Thank you for your attention. Do we take questions or is it later? Later.
Thank you, Professor Torawa. We wanted, maybe some people want to take questions, but we leave it until the end of the session. And yes, what I understood was that when translating, we must respect the culture of each language. This is also the way to be just in translating the Quran or the properly convey the meaning of the Quran. Thank you very much. And now we want to invite the next speaker, Imam Hassan Hankari, who gave us the beautiful recitation earlier. And he is an Imam Naib of the Hasanbai Masjid in Tashkent, Uzbekistan. His publication include Qur'an Tartili and Uzbek Gari sorry, I'm not familiar with Altun Silsilasi. That means golden genealogy of Uzbek Qaris. So the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن والاه. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Muhterem ustalar, aziz dinleyiciler.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone for participating. Thank you for your participation.
Markaziy Osiyoda Qur'on ta'limi kecha va bugun mavzusida sizlarga mavzuza taqdim qilmoqchiman.
I would like to make a presentation about the teaching of the Quran in Central Asia yesterday and today.
Qur'on Karimning O'rta Osiyoga kirib kelishi islom dini bilan bog'liq.
The arrival of Holy Quran in Central Asia is associated with Islam.
Islom qoidalariga ko'ra kishi musulmon bo'lgandan so'ng unga birinchi bo'lib Qur'on suralari o'rgatilgan.
According to Islam law, after a person became a Muslim, he was first taught the surah of Quran.
Bunda odatan Qur'onning qo'lyozmalari yordamida og'zaki ta'lim berish usuli bilan foydalanilgan.
This was usually done orally using manuscripts.
Ayrim kishilar ana o'sha tarzda Qur'onni to'liq yod olgan va ba'zi bir kishilar Qur'ondan mushaflardan nusxalar ko'chirib Qur'onning yozma shakli tarqalib borgan.
Those who were interested managed to memorize the entire Quran and even make copies of it from their teacher's copy. According to sources, the people.
Imom Tabari va boshqa tarixchilar aytishicha, O'rta Osiyo xalqlari Qur'onni dastlab fors tilidagi tarjimasi orqali o'rganganlar va hatto namozlarda qiroat qilganlar.
According to the sources including Imam Tabari, the people of Central Asia first learned and recited the Quran through Persian translations and then applied it in the prayers.
Keyin asta-sekin Qur'onni arab harfi, asli arabcha shaklda o'rganishga o'tganlar.
Then gradually they moved on to learning it in its original Arabic form using Arabic script.
O'rta Osiyoga ilk musulmon jamoa 55-hijriy sana, 674-milodiy sanada 3-xalifa Usmon ibn Affon roziyallohu anhuning o'g'li Said va payg'ambarimiz alayhissalomning amakivachchasi Qusam ibn Abbos boshchiligida kirib kelgan.
The first Muslim community entered Central Asia in Hijri calendar 55, in our calendar 674, under the leadership of Said. He was the son of the third Caliph Usman ibn Affan and Qusam ibn Abbas, who was a cousin of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
Qusam ibn Abbosning qabri hozir Samarqandda mavjud.
The cemetery of Qusam ibn Abbas is, as of today, currently located in Samarkand.
Ular yerli xalq o'rtasida da'vat ishlarini olib borganlar va musulmon bo'lganlarga, islomni qabul qilganlarga Qur'on o'rgatishni boshlaganlar.
They carried out dawah work among the local people and taught the Quran to those who became Muslim.
87-96-hijriy sana, 706-715 sanalar o'rtasida Qutayba ibn Muslim boshchiligidagi musulmon qo'shin tarafidan O'rta Osiyo hududi to'liq islom xalifaligiga qo'shilgan.
After the complete conquest of Central Asia by the Muslim army led by Qutayba ibn Muslim in the beginning of 8th century 8, Quran education was established on a large scale in the country.
Shundan so'ng o'lkada Qur'on ta'limi keng miqyosda yo'lga qo'yilgan. Masjidlar islomiy ilmlar, xususan Qur'on o'rgatiladigan madrasalar vazifasini ham o'tagan.
At that time, mosques also served as madrasa for Islamic science, especially the Quran.
Asta-sekin Qur'on ta'limiga ixtisoslashgan maktablar, qorixonalar, Dorul Huffoz, Dorul Tilova deya nomlangan me'moriy inshootlar barpo qilingan.
Gradually, schools specializing in Quranic education, which is called Qari Hana, and Darul Hufaz, which is memorization centers, emerged.
Shahrisabz markazida Temuriylar davrida qad rostlagan Dorul Tilova majmuasi hozirgacha saqlanib qolgan.
In the center of Shahrisabz, which is in the western part of Uzbekistan, house of recitation, which is called Darul Tilava, is still preserved until now.
Undan tashqari yirik shaharlarda qiroat ilmiga oid shotibiya asarini o'rganishga mo'ljallangan shotibiyxonalar ham mavjud bo'lgan.
In addition to that, there were also special halls for studying the work of the Shatibiya method.
Turkiston o'lkasi o'quv yurtlari boshqarmasining 3-islom o'quv yurtlari inspektori Nalifkinning 1896-yilda bergan ma'lumotida o'sha vaqtda o'lkada 300 dan ortiq qorixona mavjudligi aytilgan.
According to the information provided by the third inspector of Islamic educational institutions of the Turkestan region, Mr. Nalifkin, in 1896, there were more than 300 Quranic schools in the country at that time.
Arxiv ma'lumotlariga ko'ra 1892-yil Farg'ona viloyatida 252 ta qorixona faoliyat yuritgan.
According to actual data, in 1892, 252 Quranic schools operated in the Fergana region, which is located on the eastern part of Uzbekistan.
O'sha yillarda Andijonning o'zida, Andijon O'zbekistondagi bir shahar, ana o'sha shaharning o'zida 44 ta qorixona mavjud bo'lgan.
In those years, it was noted that there were 44 Quranic schools only in one single city called Andijan, also in the eastern part of Uzbekistan.
Namangan viloyatida 72 ta, Qo'qonda 35 ta, Marg'ilonda 45 ta, O'shda 16 ta qorixona mavjud bo'lgan.
Such schools were located in Namangan, which were 72. In Qo'qon city, there were 35, and in Margilan, 45 schools located.
Qorixonalarda asosan Qur'on o'rgatilgan, Qur'on yodlatilgan.
Basically, in that school's Qur'ana, the Qur'an was taught and memorized.
Undan tashqari masjidlar qoshida, maktablarda, madrasalarda ham Qur'on ta'limi olib borilgan.
In addition, Quran education was also carried out at various levels at mosques, schools, and madrasa.
Ushbu davrda, ya'ni 19-20-asrda O'rta Osiyoning yirik shaharlarida 1200 dan ortiq maktab, 250 ga yaqin madrasa faoliyat yuritgani hisobga olinsa, o'lkadagi 6 yoshdan 14 yoshgacha bo'lgan barcha o'g'il bolalar maktabga qatnagani, ularning ko'pchiligi madrasalarda o'qishni davom ettirgani. Demak, aholi to'laligicha Qur'on savodi bor kishilar bo'lgani ma'lum bo'ladi.
Considering that during that period more than 1,200 schools and about 250 madrasa operated in Central Asia, it becomes clear that all boys and girls in the country in that region aged between 6 to 14 attended school, and most of them continued their studies in madrasa, and therefore the entire population was literate and able to read the Qur'an.
Maxsus ilmiy dargohlardan tashqari ustozlar o'z uylarida talabalarga Qur'on va boshqa diniy ilmlardan ta'lim berganlar.
In addition to specialized scientific institutions such madrasa and schools, teachers also taught students the Quran and other religious sciences in their homes.
Ayol qizlar odatda mudarris ustozlar, masjid imomlarining ahli ayollarini qo'lida ta'lim olgan.
Women were usually educated by teachers who belonged to the families of mosque imams.
Ayrim muallimalar o'z hovlilarida, o'z uylarida maktab tashkil qilganlar.
Some teachers established schools in their own courtyards.
U yerda ayol qizlar Qur'on va boshqa diniy ta'limni o'zlashtirganlar.
Such teachers dedicated their education only to women, and the teachers were called Atin-ay in Uzbek language.
Atin oylar o'z faoliyatlarida arab tili, Qur'on ilmlaridan tashqari mumtoz adabiyot, odob, axloq fanlaridan ham dars berganlar.
In addition to Arabic and Quranic studies, Atin-ay also taught classical literature and ethics and akhlaq.
Ularning ushbu ilmiy faoliyatlari O'zbek milliyligini asrashda katta xizmat qilgan.
Their scientific activities made a great contribution to preserving national and Muslim identity.
Tarixiy ma'lumotlarga ko'ra, Xivadagi Ichon qal'aning o'zida jami 96 ta qorixona faoliyat yuritgan.
According to historical data, a total number of 96 madrasa operated in Ichankala, which is a castle in the city Khiva, which is located in the far west of Uzbekistan.
Bu inshootlarning qariyb yarmi hozirgacha saqlanib qolgan.
About half of that buildings of that madrasa have survived to this day.
Buxoro, Samarqand, Qashqadaryo, Toshkent viloyati va Farg'ona vodiysidagi madrasa va qorixonalarning ko'pchiligi Rossiya imperiyasi bosqini hamda bolsheviklarning dinga qarshi siyosati oqibatida yo'q qilingan.
Most of the madrasa and qarikhanas in the cities Bukhara, Samarkand, Tashkent and in the Fergana Valley were destroyed as a result of the invasion of Russian Empire and the anti-religious policies of the Bolsheviks.
Saqlanib qolgan madrasa va qorixonalar mana shu mintaqadagi davlatlar mustaqil bo'lgach qayta ta'mirlandi va sayohatchilar uchun ochib qo'yildi.
Those that survived were renovated after the countries became independent after the collapse of Soviet Union and continue to serve to tourists as of today.
O'rta Osiyoda hadis, fiqh, aqida, tafsir va boshqa bir qator ilmiy sohalarda dunyoga dong'i ketgan allomalar yetishib chiqqani barchaga ma'lum va mashhur.
It is well known that Central Asia has produced world-renowned scholars in the fields of hadith, jurisprudence, aqidah, tafsir, and a number of other scientific fields.
Biroq nashrlarda bu yurtdan Qur'on va qiroat ilmidagi salohiyati haqida ma'lumotlar kam uchraydi.
However, there is no information in publications about the potential or power of this country in the science of Qur'an and recitation.
Izlanishlar natijasida shu narsa ma'lum bo'ldiki, O'rta Osiyo hududida qiroat ilmida ham yetuk olimlar yetishib chiqqan.
According to the research of scholars, Central Asia has also produced a lot of outstanding scholars in the science of recitation.
Jumladan, mashhur 10 qiroat imomlaridan biri Ali al-Kisoiyning eng katta shogirdlaridan Abu Zakariya al-Xorazmiy. Mashhur qiroat olimlaridan Imom Kisoiy va Imom Hamzaning shogirdi, muhaddislar imomi Muhammad ibn Ismoil al-Buxoriyning Qur'on o'rgatgan ustozi Ubaydulloh ibn Musa al-Abasi. Kufari qiroat imomlaridan Yahyo ibn Odamning shogirdi Musa at-Tirmiziy. 3-hijriy asrda yashab ijod qilgan Haysam al-Buxoriy qiroat ilmida o'z davrining yetuk olimlaridan mustaqil qiroat sohibi, ya'ni qiroat ilmida mujtahid sanalgan Mas'ud ibn Solih as-Samarqandiy. Keyinchalik Madinada istiqomat qilib qolgan Abu Husayn al-Farg'oniy. 4-hijriy asrda yashab o'tgan Muhammad ibn Muhammad al-Fustoti. Qiroat ilmiga oid Al-G'uniya kitobi muallifi Abu Nasr as-Samarqandiy. 10 qiroat darg'asi bilimdoni degan faxriy unvonga ega bo'lgan Ali ibn Muhammad al-Xorazmiy. O'z davrida Xorazm shayxi bo'lgan, 7 qiroatni puxta o'zlashtirib o'rgatishda nom chiqargan Abdulloh as-Sab'a, Abdulloh 7 deb nom olgan Abdulloh al-Xorazmiy va boshqalarni eslash mumkin.
In particular, one of the greatest students of Ali ibn Hamza al-Kisai, one of the 10 qira'ah recitation imams, Abu Zakariya al-Kharazmi, a student of the famous scholars of recitation, Imam al-Kisa and Hamza, a teacher of the Qur'an of the commander of the faithful, Muhammad ibn Ismail al-Bukhari, Ubaydullah ibn Musa al-Abasi, Musa ibn Hizam al-Tirmizi, who was a student of Yahya ibn Adam from Kufa. Another person was Haysam ibn Ibrahim ibn Ahmad Bukhari, who also lived and created the herds, who lived in the 3rd Hijri century, one of the mature scholars of that time in the science of recitation. Another person which should be highlighted would be Masud ibn Salih as-Samarqandi. His title was Mujtahid in Quranic Qira'ah, which means an independent reciter. Laterly he lived in Medina. And we can mention also Abu Nasr Ahmad as-Samarqandi, who was the author of the book Science Recitation called Al-Ghunya, and Ali ibn Muhammad Kharazmi, who was honorable title of Master of the 10 Recitations. He was the Sheikh of Kharazm at that time. Also, we should mention Abdullah al-Khwarizmi, who was known as Abdullah Saba, which means Abdullah the Seven, for his thorough mastery of the 7 recitations and his teachings. In addition,
Ulardan tashqari O'rta Osiyodan yetishib chiqqan Imom al-Buxoriy, Imom at-Tirmiziy, Abu Hafs Kabir, Imom al-Maturidi, Abu Lays Samarqandi, Burhoniddin Marg'uloni, Mahmud az-Zamakhshari, Umar an-Nasafiy kabi islomiy ilmlar mutaxassislari, Abu Ali ibn Sino, Abu Rayhon Beruniy, Ahmad al-Farg'oniy kabi tajribiy ilmlarda tanilgan olimlar, Mirzo Ulug'bek Ubaydulloh Xon Shayboniy kabi siyosat arboblari ham ayni vaqtda Qur'on va qiroat ilmida yetuk ulamolar hisoblangan.
in addition, we also know that experts in Islamic sciences such as famous Imam al-Bukhari, Imam at-Tirmizi, Abu Hafs Kabir, Imam al-Maturidi, Abu Lays Samarqandi, Burhanuddin al-Malgirani, Mahmud az-Zamakhshari, Umar Nasafi, and also scholars who are well known in experimental Islamic sciences such as Ibn Sina, Abu Rayhan al-Biruni, Ahmad al-Farghani, and other political figures such as Mirza Ulugh and Ubaydullah Khan Shaybani were also among the leading scholars in the science of the Qur'an and recitation.
19-asr oxiri, 20-asr boshlarida Rossiya imperiyasi O'rta Osiyoni bosib olib, Turkiston general gubernatorligini tashkil qilib, islom o'quv yurtlari huquqlari va faoliyatlarini cheklagan bo'lishiga qaramay, o'lkada nafaqat Qur'on yodlatish, balki 7 mashhur qiroatdan darslar ham davom etdi.
Despite the fact that Russian Empire conquered Central Asia at the end of 19th century and the beginning of 20th, established Turkestan governorate, and despite a lot of restrictions for the rights and activities of Islamic educational institutions, not only the memorization of the Quran, but also the lessons in the 7 famous recitations continued in the country.
Biroq 1918-yil Qo'qon muxtoriyati, 1920-yil Buxoro amirligi bolsheviklar tarafidan tugatilgach, Sovet hukumati O'rta Osiyoda islom diniga qarshi ayovsiz kurash olib borib, masjid, madrasa, qoraxona, eski maktablarning vaqf mulklarini musodara etdi va ularni butunlay yopib yo'q qildi.
However, after the Kokand autonomy was abolished by Bolsheviks in 1918 and the Bukhara Emirate in 1920, the Soviet government waged a merciless struggle against Islam in Central Asia, confiscating the endowments of mosques, madrasa, qarkhanas and all schools, and completely closing and destroying them.
Mustabid tuzum bilim yurtlarini tugatibgina qolmay, diniy ulamolarni, Qur'on qorilarini barcha huquqlardan mahrum etib, qatag'on qila boshladi.
The authoritarian regime not only abolished educational institutions, but also began to repress religious scholars and Quran reciters, depriving them of all rights.
Ularning ko'plari otib tashlandi yoki surgun qilindi. Katta qismi o'z yurtini tashlab, boshqa o'lkalarga hijrat qilishga majbur bo'ldi.
Many of them were shot, and a large part was forced to leave their homeland and emigrate hijrah to other countries.
Asrlar osha uzluksiz davom etib kelgan ustoz shogirdlik an'anasiga ko'ra ta'lim ham ta'qibga olindi. Hatto o'z farzandiga islom va Qur'on haqida so'zlagan ota-onalar ham jazoga tortildi.
Education, which continued which was a centuries-old tradition, was also persecuted, and even parents who spoke to their children and their family about Islam and the Quran were strictly punished.
Bu kurash shunchalar dahshatli avj oldiki, odamlarning qo'lidagi diniy adabiyotlar ham tortib olindi, mushaflar yoqib yuborildi.
The fight against religion became so fierce that even religious literature was confiscated and manuscripts were burned.
Ikkinchi jahon urushi paytida diniy siyosat biroz yumshadi.
During World War II, the religious situation eased somewhat.
1943-yil O'rta Osiyo va Qozog'iston diniy boshqarmasi tashkil etilib, asta-sekin yirik shaharlardagi masjidlar qayta ochildi.
In 1943, the Central Asian and Kazakh religious administration was established, and mosques in major cities were gradually reopened.
Masjidlarga imom xatiblar yetkazib berish maqsadida Buxoroda bir arab madrasasi, 1971-yil Toshkentda Imomi Buxoriy nomida Islom instituti ish boshladi.
In order to provide imams and preachers for mosque, the Mir Arab Madrasa was opened in Bukhara in 1971. The Imam Bukhari Islamic Institute was opened in Tashkent.
1991-yil Sovet ittifoqi parchalangunicha butun O'rta Osiyo bo'yicha faqat shu ikkita islomiy bilim yurti faoliyat olib bordi.
Until the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, only these two Islamic educational institutions operated in all of the Central Asia.
Ularda bir vaqtda jami 100 ga yaqin talaba tahsil olar edi xolos.
And about 100 students were studying at the same time only.
Tabiiyki bu imkoniyat millionlagan xalqning diniy ilmlarga bo'lgan ehtiyojini qondira olmagan edi.
Obviously, this opportunity could not satisfy the people's need for religious science.
Shu bois qatag'onlardan omon qolgan ulamolar qiziqqan musulmonlarga diniy ilmlardan, jumladan Qur'oni Karimdan yakka tartibda ta'lim bera boshladi.
Therefore, scholars who survived the repressions began to provide individual instruction teachings in religious science, including the Qur'an.
1960-yillarga kelib ayrim ustozlar o'z uylarida xususiy diniy ta'limni yo'lga qo'ydilar.
In the years of 1960s, some teachers has established private religious education in their homes.
1970-yillardan so'ng Qur'on va islomiy ilmlarni o'rganmoqchi bo'lgan talabalar uchun xonadonlarda yakka tartibda sharoitlar yaratildi va bunday ta'lim o'choqlari xalq o'rtasida hujra deb ataldi.
After the 1970s, individual conditions were created in homes for students so that they can live and study the Quran and Islamic science. Such educational centers were called hujra among the people. Hujra in Uzbek means room. So the room specialized for living and learning the Quran.
Hujralarda asosan Qur'on yodlatilsa-da, ayrim joylarda arab tili, fiqh, tafsir va boshqa islomiy ilmlar ham o'rgatilgan.
Although the Quran was mainly memorized in the hujra, in some places Arabic, jurisprudence, interpretation and other Islamic science were also taught.
Ushbu ilmiy harakatda o'sha davrda arab tili va shar'iy ilmlarda Dushanbe, Marg'ilon shaharlari, Qur'on o'rgatish bo'yicha esa Andijon va Namangan shaharlari yetakchilik qilgan.
During that period, the cities of Dushanbe and Margilan they took lead in Arabic and Sharia science. Namangan and Andijon took lead in the teaching of the Quran.
Hujra ta'limida ustozlar talabalarga milliy diniy qadriyatlar, odob, axloq, an'anaviy madaniyatni ham singdirib borganlar. Ba'zan mumtoz adabiyot ham o'rgatilgan.
In the hujra education, students were taught national religious values, ethics, etiquettes, traditional culture, and sometimes even classical literature.
Ateistik mafkuraga asoslangan mustabid tuzum davrida olib borilgan ushbu ilmiy harakat yuksak jasorat, haqiqiy fidoilik va milliy uyg'onish ildizlaridan biri sifatida baholanadi.
This hujra movement carried out during the era of tyrannical regime based on atheistic thought is considered one of the roots of high courage, true self-sacrifice and national awakening.
Andijonlik ustozlarning Qur'on ta'limida ko'rsatgan tashabbuslari bois oxirgi asrlarda Andijon Qur'on maktabi shakllanib, O'rta Osiyo va Qozog'iston hatto Kavkaz yurtlarini ham qamrab oldi.
Due to the initiatives of Andijan teachers in the education of the Quran, in recent centuries, the Andijan Quranic school it took shape and spread to Central Asia, Kazakhstan, and even the Caucasus.
Hozirda sobiq ittifoq hududidagi ko'p qorilarning sanadi, ya'ni ta'lim zanjiri aynan andijonlik Qur'on ustozlariga bog'lanadi.
Today, if we look to the lineage chain of the many reciters in the former Soviet Union, we can tie them to the Quranic teachers from Andijan.
Endi o'sha davrda mana shu yakka tartibdagi Qur'on ta'limida qanday uslublardan, qanday yo'nalishlardan foydalanilgani haqida qisqacha to'xtalsak.
Let me introduce some concrete examples what kind of methods were used under such authoritarian regime.
Yer ostidan, uyning ichida yer ostida joy qilingan maxsus o'sha yerda farzandi yoki yaqin kishilarni farzandlariga Qur'on o'rgatishgan. Tashqarida yer yuzasidagi uylarda Qur'on o'qilsa, ovozi ko'chaga eshitilib ta'qibga uchrashdan qo'rqishgan. Bu borada otamiz Yahyoxon qori o'zlarining otalari ularni mana shunday tarzda o'qitganini hikoya qilib berganlar.
For example, let's see one example. One had to live in the basement of his house and then teach the Quran to his children or the children of his close friends or relatives. So one did this because he was afraid that if they recite the Quran at home, his voice could be heard on the street and he would be persecuted. This story was told by my own father, Yahya Qankari, who heard from such many stories from his fathers.
Ikkinchisi, yer olib dehqonchilik bilan shug'ullanish bahonasida farzand va shogirdlarga Qur'on yodlatishgan. Andijondagi Muhammad Mubin qori ustoz shu tarzda bir nechta qorilarni yetishtirgan.
Second example could be that people acquired land and engaged in agriculture, farming. The purpose of doing that was teaching their children and memorizing the Quran. In Andijan, Qari Muhammad raised several qaris in this way.
Uchinchisi, g'or va shu kabi pana joylarga yashirinib ta'lim berishgan. Masalan, Samarqandda hozir ham bir daraxt bor, ichi g'ovak qilib o'yilgan. Ustozlardan biri mana shu joyda shogird yetishtirgan.
Another way teaching was done in secret caves and similar sheltered places. For example, there is a large tree in the Samarkand. Inside it, a person can enter. The hollow was carved, and one of the teachers taught Quran secretly inside that tree.
Hunar o'rgatish asnosida Qur'on ta'lim berish ham keng yoyilgan bo'lgan. Toshkentlik Fayzulloh qori temirchilik bilan shug'ullanar va ana o'sha temirchilikning ovozi ostida shogirdlarga Qur'on o'rgatar ekan. Kasblar ichida shogirdlarga odob, axloq o'rgatish bilan birga Qur'on yodlatadigan kishilar ham ko'p bo'lgan.
Teaching the Quran was quite widespread among the people of artisanship. For example, Faizullah Qari from Tashkent used to teach his students the Quran while sitting and working on the side of blacksmith's workbench. Among the artisans, there were also many who taught their students not only daily manners and ethics, akhlaq, but also they taught them how to memorize the verses of the Quran.
Shogirdlarning uyiga, ular istiqomat qilib turgan yotoqxonalarga borib ta'lim berish ham keng yoyilgan. Buni ko'proq tunda amalga oshirishgan. Andijonlik Muhammad Mubin qori, Abdulboqi qori yana boshqa ustozlar shu yo'sinda shogirdlar tarbiyalagan.
Another way of teaching the Quran was given by going to the students' home and their living. Teachers visited their house at night so that no one can notice. We can give some names of such people who created their predecessors.
Yo'l-yo'lakay o'qitishni ham yo'lga qo'yishgan. Masalan, o'zgarlik Abdurahim qori ot aravasida yurib qishloqni aylanar edi. Haftaning ma'lum kunida, ma'lum joyda shogirdlar o'sha aytilgan vaqtda kutib turgan. Bir shogirdni aravaga o'tirgizib, uni darsini eshitib, uni yo'lda tushirib, keyingi manzildan navbatdagi shogirdni aravaga olib, shu tarzda bir hafta ichida qishloqni to'liq aylanib chiqib, shogirdlarga ta'lim bergan.
Another way of teaching was very interesting. It was done while traveling around the village in a cart, as you can see the photo of that time. That cart was pulled by horse or donkey, and students would arrive. They knew that, for example, on Wednesday 5 p.m. is my time, and then came to that place, and they joined the teacher to the next student. During that period, they gave their tasks. They checked their memorization with their teacher, and once teacher gave their advice until the next student. Then the next students came out. There was no any connection, but people knew that at that time and day, such way they learned how to they learned memorizing the Quran.
Talabalar ustozning uyida yoki u bilan birga bir manzilda bir hafta, bir oylab birga yotib undan dars olgan va bunda demak ta'lim oson kechgan, ammo bunday joylarni odatda ko'pchilikdan maxfiy tutishgan.
Another way was very rare, but it was kept very secretly from the public, which was the student lived in the teacher's house in a shared manner, and this was also facilitated the memorization of Quran.
Ustozlarning uyiga tunda, tong saharda kelib dars olish ham keng mavjud bo'lgan va kunduzi kuzatuvlardan o'zlarini olib qochib, asosan kechasi ustozning huzuriga kelib dars olishgan. Bizning qiblagohimiz huzuriga ham Tojikistondan, yana boshqa uzoq joylardan tunda kelib dars oladigan shogirdlar bo'lgan.
Coming to teacher's house at night was a common practice because during the day there was a strong persecution. That's why people get accustomed to teach during the night. Even in my personal life, my father, Yahya Hamqari, also taught some of his students. Some of the students came from Tajikistan, which is currently another country to the Uzbekistan. They traveled through train and they arrived especially for night time and took their lessons and they went back. That was a practice of the night teachings.
O'rta Osiyo yurtidagi ustozlar odatdan bepul ta'lim bergan shogirdlarga, aynan o'sha davrlarda.
During that period, teachers in the Central Asia basically taught their students free, out of charge.
Shogirdlarning ota-onalari ko'ngildan chiqarib hadiya bersa, shuni qabul qilishgan xolos.
They only accepted donations or gifts which were given by their parents.
Ustozlar odatdan o'zlarining hunarlari, savdogarlik va tirikchilik sabablariga ega bo'lgan. Ba'zan shogirdlarni ular yonidan ta'minotini qilgan.
Teachers made their living from their other professions. Sometimes they were dedicated to they had artisanship or other jobs. In some occasions, they even helped financially to their students.
Ayrim joylarda saxovatli boylar ana o'shanday ustozlarga moddiy ko'mak berib turgan, talabalarning ta'minotini qilib turgan.
In some places, local wealthy people supported this scientific movement of Ujra and they helped the teachers or the students.
Hozirda O'zbekistonda 3 ta oliy va 10 ta o'rta maxsus islom ta'lim muassasasi mavjud.
As of today, in the Uzbekistan, there are 3 highest and 10 secondary specialized Islamic educational institutions.
Qozog'istonda 12 ta davlat madrasasi bor.
If you look in Kazakhstan, there are 12 state madrasa.
Bundan tashqari islomiy ilmlarga ixtisoslashgan institut va universitetlar ham mavjud.
And there are institutes and universities specializing in Islamic science.
Qirg'izistonda islomiy ta'lim beruvchi 130 ta o'quv muassasasi, jumladan qizlarga ixtisoslashgan 34 ta madrasa mavjud.
In Kyrgyzstan, there is 130 educational institutions, out of which 34 is dedicated for girls and women.
Bugun ushbu madrasalarda talabalar islomiy ilmlar qatori Qur'on ham o'rganmoqdalar.
In those schools, as of today, people are learning Islamic science and also the Qur'an memorization.
Imom Buxoriy nomidagi Toshkent Islom institutida tahfizul Qur'on bo'limi mavjud bo'lib, bu yerda Qur'on yodlatishdan tashqari Qur'on qiroatlari ham o'rgatiladi.
In Tashkent, Islamic Institute named after Imam Bukhari has a special dedicated department called Tahfiz al-Quran, where in addition to memorizing the Quran, recitations also taught.
Bundan tashqari O'zbekistonda madrasalar qoshida 3 oylik Qur'on kurslari ham tashkil etilgan bo'lib, ularda Qur'onni to'g'ri o'qish malakasini hosil qilish imkoni mavjud.
In addition, 3 months Quran courses have been organized under the madrasa, which is possible to read and memorize the Quran for the people, to anyone who are above 18 years old.
Qozog'iston va Qirg'iziston masjidlarida Qur'on o'rgatadigan kurslarda maktab o'quvchilari ham Qur'on yod oladilar.
School children can also memorize the Quran in the courses taught especially inside the mosque in Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan.
O'zbekistonda maktab yoshidagi bolalar asosan oilaviy sharoitda Qur'on o'rganadilar.
In case of Uzbekistan, school age children mainly learn the Quran in a family setting.
O'rta Osiyoda amalda qo'llangan ta'lim uslubiga kelsak, odatda dastlab Qur'ondan qisqa suralar og'zaki o'rgatiladi.
If you look at the method practiced in Central Asia, short chapters from the Quran are usually taught orally at first.
Qisqa oyatlarni, kalimalarni ustoz dona-dona qilib o'qib beradi, shogird uni eshitib, ustoz ortidan takrorlash orqali yodlab oladi.
Teacher reads the short verses, word and words, piece by piece, and the student listens and memorize them and repeat after the teacher.
Keyin o'zi mustaqil ravishda takrorlash yordamida oyatlarni xotirasida mustahkamlab boradi.
Then he consolidates the verse in his memory with the help of self-repetition.
Ayni paytda arab yozuvini o'rganib, asta-sekin suralarni xat orqali o'rganishni yo'lga qo'yiladi.
At the same time, learning the Arabic script letters and gradually learning the surah by letter is stopped.
Qur'on yodlashda turli uslublar mavjud.
There are different methods of memorizing Qur'an.
O'rta Osiyoda bu borada har bir davr va har bir joyda o'ziga mos uslublar qo'llangan.
In this regard, in Central Asia, each period and each place used its own method.
Hatto har bir ustozning o'ziga xos ta'lim uslubi bo'lgan.
Even each teacher had his own style.
Bu uslublarni shartli ravishda ikki turga ajratish mumkin.
We can divide it into two big groups.
Birinchisi, yodlangan suralarni esda saqlagan holda yangi suralarni yodlash orqali Qur'onni to'liq yod olish.
First one is memorizing the entire Qur'an by memorizing new surah while retaining the memorized ones.
Bunda talaba yod olgan suralarni ma'lum tartibda ustoz yoki uning vakiliga muntazam yoddan o'qib berib turadi.
In this case, the student continuously recite the memorized surah to the teacher or his representative in a certain order.
Ikkinchisi, Qur'onni bir chetdan qayta yodlab topshirish orqali uni to'liq yod oladi.
Second type is memorizing the Qur'an completely by reciting it over and over again.
Bunda yodlangan suralarni esda saqlab qolishga e'tibor qaratilmaydi, yodlab pastga qarab tushaveradi. Har gal kundalik dars miqdori ortib boradi. Bir sahifa, keyin 2 sahifa, keyin 5 sahifa, keyin yarim pora yod oladi.
In this, the importance of repeatedly memorizing the surah is not emphasized. Instead, the daily volume of lessons increase each time one memorizes from top to bottom. Finally, one recites one juz a day. One is considered to have memorized the Qur'an.
O'rta Osiyoda Qur'on ta'lim borasida so'z ketganda, Qur'onning yozma shakli, mushaflar yaratish va saqlashga bo'lgan e'tiborni ham esda tutish darkor.
We have to also mention about the preservation and creation of the written form of Qur'an in Central Asia.
Hozirda O'zbekistonda kitob xazinalarida turli asrlarda yozilgan minglagan qadimiy mushaflar saqlanmoqda.
Currently in Uzbekistan, you can find thousands of ancient mushafs written in different centuries in its books treasuries.
Bugungi kunda dunyoning eng noyob qo'lyozmalaridan biri hisoblangan Usmon mushafining asrlar osha ushbu o'lkada asrab kelinib, hozirda O'zbekiston poytaxti Toshkent shahrida yuqori texnologik sharoitda saqlanayotgani, xususan O'zbekiston prezidenti Shavkat Mirziyoyevning tashabbusi bilan qad rostlagan Islom sivilizatsiya markazining katta zali aynan Qur'onning qimmatbaho qo'lyozmalari, jumladan Toshkent Usmon mushafi uchun ajratilgani fikrimizni yana bir bor quvvatlaydi.
Today, the Uthman Mus'haf, which was considered the most rare manuscript in the world, has been preserved in a special manner in the capital of Uzbekistan, Tashkent city. And we have to mention that it is today is a special big hall of the Islamic Civilization Center, which is built by the initiative of current President Uzbekistan, Shavkat Mirziyoyev. This big hall is specifically to this Uthman Qur'an in this center.
Ayni paytda O'zbekiston O'rta Osiyo mintaqasida mushaf chop qilish bo'yicha ham yetakchilikni egallab kelmoqda.
As of today, Uzbekistan is also a leader in modern mushaf printing in Central Asia.
Toshkentdagi Hilol nashriyot matbaasida har yili 40-50 ming adadda mushaf nashr etilmoqda va butun mintaqaga yetkazilmoqda.
In Tashkent, the Hilal Nashr Publishing House every year publishing 40 to 50,000 copies of mushaf and distributing them all over the Central Asia region.
O'zbekiston aholisining ko'pchilik musulmonlari arab tilini bilmasa ham Qur'on o'qishni o'zlashtirgan.
Nowadays, many Muslims, even in Uzbekistan, even if they don't know Arabic, they have mastered the Quran well and they memorized it.
Voyaga yetmagan bolalar orasida arab tilini bilmagan holda Qur'onni to'liq yod olganlar talaygina.
Among the minors, it's very common to memorize the entire Quran without knowing any Arabic.
Ularning Qur'on kalimalarini talaffuz nutq qilishda xuddi arablardek malakaga ega bo'lishi diqqatga sazovor.
it's very noteworthy that they have the same skill as the Arab people, especially in pronouncing the words of the Quran.
Xalqaro musobaqalarda O'rta Osiyo davlatlaridan qatnashgan Qur'on qorilarining dunyo qorilari, jumladan arablar o'rtasida sovrinli o'rinlarni egallab kelayotgani so'zimizning isbotidir.
The proof of our word is that the reciters of the Quran from the countries of Central Asia have won prizes in international competitions among reciters from all over the world, including Arab native speakers.
2018-yil O'zbekiston Prezidenti Shavkat Mirziyoyev tashabbusi bilan o'tkazilgan Qur'on musobaqasida yuzlab Qur'on hofizlari faol qatnashgani dunyo musulmonlari tomonidan yuksak baholandi.
The active participation of hundreds of Quran reciters in the Quran competition, which is held in 2018 at the initiative of the President of Uzbekistan, Shavkat Mirziyoyev, was highly appreciated by Muslims around the world and the region.
Sizlarga yetkazmoqchi bo'lganimiz asosiy so'zlarimiz mana shular edi. Bu qisqacha ma'lumot, to'liq ushbu mavzuni yoritgan ilmiy maqolani biz Yaponiya yana boshqa xalqaro jurnallarga taqdim qilmoqchimiz.
We tried to cover this in a short time, but we are planning to publish a full article in near future that can be available in Japan or in other countries.
Ana o'sha 19-20 asrlarda yashab o'tgan, Qur'onga xizmat qilgan, Qur'on ta'limiga hissa qo'shgan ustozlarning tajriba hollari va ularning Payg'ambarimiz alayhissalatu vassalomgacha Qur'on ta'limi bo'yicha silsilasini, ilmiy silsilasini yoritgan bir kitob asar ta'lif etildi. Bu kitobni men o'zim ta'lif etdim. Kitobning
So I would like to take a very short time to introduce a book in which we described the biography of the teachers who taught the Quran during 18th, 19th century in Central Asia and the chain to connect it to the until Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam.
O'zbek qorinlarining oltin silsilasi deb nomladik kitobni.
We put the name of golden chain of the reciters of the Quran.
واسم الكتاب بالعربية التبيان في بعض تراجم وأسانيد قراء أوزبكستان. Kitobning bir qismi arabchaga tarjima qilindi, muhim qismi, va u qismi O'zbekiston qorilarining san'atlari va ba'zi qorilarining tarjimai hollari deb ataldi.
This book has two parts. One part is in Uzbek language, other part is in Arabic language. In that Arabic language, you can find the chain of the reciters of the Quran, especially in Central Asia.
Mana kitobning arabcha qismida O'zbekistonda o'sha vaqtda 20-asrda Qur'onga xizmat qilgan, Qur'on ta'limi bilan shug'ullangan ustozlarning tarjimai hollari bor. Ularni mutaxassislar o'qib o'rganishlari mumkin.
If you open the book from that side, you can find the Arabic version, when you can find the biography and the chain of all the people who dedicated to teach and memorize the Quran in the 20th century in Central Asia.
Hammalaringiz uchun tashakkur. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Imam, for your informative lecture and detailed historical development of the Quran's education in Central Asia. Amidst of political oppression in the next speaker, Next speaker is Dr. Selene Ibrahim, who specializes in Islamic studies, in intellectual history and gender studies, and ethics. Here is her well-known book I have here, and you can read later, titled Women and Gender in the Quran. And Dr. Ibrahim is also the author of Islam and the Monotheism, and today the title, the Qur'an and the Constructive Theology. We would like to hear what you have. Thank you.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. لمن نشكر الناس لا يشكر الله. So thank you so much to Dr. Amigato and for all the people who have been involved in putting this conference together. It's truly been wonderful so far. So in my talk today, I'd like to introduce to you the idea of constructive theology as it is growing out of the North American Academy and the Western Academy slightly broader. Now, I will not read everything off my slides. At the end, I do have a QR code and you can download the slides and look at them at your own pace. But forgive me if I do go quickly through some of the slides. So what is constructive theology? In the Islamic tradition, we have the discipline of kalam that grew out of the intersecting between philosophical ideas coming out of the ancient Greek world being translated into Arabic, and it created a conversation. And in so many ways, this discipline of constructive scholarship in the American, North American, and Western Academy broader is this conversation between what was originally an Orientalist looking at Islam, and then what has become now Muslims in the academy making their own scholarship. And so constructive theology comes out of this merging of these two ways of looking at Islam. Now, if we're thinking about theology as a discipline in the Western Academy, we have to recognize that many of the premier institutions in the West are actually started as Protestant theological schools. Harvard University, where I did my training, and of course where Dr. Shaukat did his training at Yale, does his teaching at Yale University. These are places that initially started off as seminaries and have maintained divinity schools where primarily it has been a Christian audience that has attended, and now we find that these divinity schools also at times welcome Muslim scholars. And so this has created a new genre of thinking about engaging with the intellectual tradition. Now, in the context of Muslim constructive theology, we have what some of us term Muslima theology, which is a Muslim female-centric way of thinking about theology, and I'll explain what that is and what that entails. So Muslima theology is grounded in Muslim women's experience with the Qur'an, with the faith tradition more broadly, and it's grounded in, I'd say, an urge that swells from many of our beings to be in conversation with how Islam is understood and practiced in the world. And so Muslima theology seeks to respond to the circumstances of modernity, seeks to respond to the lived experiences of women's lives and the struggles that everyday Muslims face. So it's very much a discipline that is responsive to and in conversation with the contemporary atmosphere, the contemporary culture. So we have, of course, in Islam, this long discipline, this long history of Muslim women's scholarship. And Muslima theology draws inspiration from this legacy of women's learning and also seeks to expand opportunities for women scholars to contribute to the knowledge that is this wide ocean of Islamic studies. Now, an important part of Muslima theology is also engaging not only with the Qur'an in terms of the stories that the Qur'an tells or the moral theology, but also with the legal tradition that is derived from the Qur'an in conversation with other sources. Now, if I would try to express some of the guiding principles of what Muslima theology tries to bring to the table, if we think about the long history of the Islamic intellectual tradition, we find that although women were present, it has been dominated by men. And so Muslima theology really tries to articulate a space in which women are active contributors to this discourse. And at times that means re-articulating how we would like the tradition to talk about ourselves. And so there is a, maybe we could say a revisionist impulse in places to say that the tradition writ large has not always respected the intellect, the agency, the contributions of women in a way that many of us, in a robust way that many of us feel are inherent in Islam, but maybe not always expressed at different points throughout history. And so it is a discipline that takes our faith commitment as Muslims seriously, and also takes seriously this mode of intellectual engagement that is very much a culture of the Western Academy. So in this framework of Muslim theology, Muslima theology, we're trying to shape what is then taught as lived Islam to the next generations. And much of this effort requires sensitivity to the heritage while also trying to steer in some new directions at times. So what I'd like to offer to you today is a little bit of a glimpse into how Quranic studies has been a part of the Western Academy, and then what Muslims themselves as constructive theologians are bringing to the picture. So my rationales for looking at some of the forerunners of what I could say is this constructive engagement with Islam is to get a sense of where should we go in this present moment based on where we have been. It's to give credit for the intellectual work that has preceded those of us who are in this current phase in our lives trying to produce this scholarship, and to understand how some of the politics of intellectual knowledge production are playing out. So here's a little game for those of you who are in Islamic studies. You might think this is a book catalog, but this is actually the book catalog of one individual. And I'm wondering if those of you who are in Islamic studies, does anyone think they know whose works these are? Does anyone have a guess here? I like to play games. This is it. So Anne-Marie Schimmel, who was a longtime professor at Harvard University, and Harvard University has this wonderful interactive history of Islamic studies at Harvard, and who was tremendously influential, not only as a scholar, but a very dedicated teacher. And although I don't know that she ever openly identified as Muslim, those of you know, Shaka shaking his head, why I put her in this intellectual genealogy and why I start with her is because she's one of the first writing in the Western Academy that captures somewhat of the spirit of Muslim lived practice, Muslim devotion, and really helps elevate that to an area worth considering alongside of studies that were going on of Islamic philosophy and the like. So this is where we can start to see in some ways an interest in Muslim lived theology. Of course, I couldn't stand in front of you faithfully here today without also including Dr. Zutsu in this genealogy, who taught at McGill University for many years and whose works in the Qur'an inspired me as a student. This is a quotation from an article that Google translated for me in Japanese. So I will leave it to someone else to verify that this is true, but a person who could play the entire outfield and really centered the Qur'an in this Eurocentric academy as something that could be engaged for its ethical teachings. And so he was focused on the semantic relationship between words, but brought to Quranic studies this deep appreciation. Dr. Fazlur Rahman, a Pakistani academic who then taught at the University of Chicago for many years, was also someone who was very much influential in my own work as a younger student. And you see here from this quotation that he was pushing back against Western scholarship quite dramatically at times for not really getting to the point of the Quran. And this is, as I think about Muslima theology, oftentimes Muslima theology is trying to reclaim what many of us see as this inherent appreciation for women's piety and spirituality and intellect. And so in the academic terms, I look to how he spoke back to the Western Academy as someone who represented the Muslim tradition. And so in so many ways, this is where I would say, if we're going to say, where does constructive theology start? I would maybe propose that it would start with Dr. Fazlur Rahman. And of course, we have a long trajectory of Western academics studying Islam, some of them Muslim, including those that you see here, but they're not yet able to cast their work in terms of theology. Their studies of Islamic philosophy, their studies of Arabic language, but not yet Muslim theology. And this has to do with the politics of knowledge production. And you see